Welcome back. Well, there is an important debate brewing ahead. CNBC TV 18 has learned that the General Insurance Council, GIC, is likely to implead itself in a petition filed in the Supreme Court that treatment costs for COVID should be capped by hospitals, as they have noted differential charges for patients with insurance cover and without insurance cover. Viren, Shetty, Executive Director and Group COO of Narayan Health, and Mr. Sharma, Secretary General, General Insurance Council, are joining us to help us get a grip on what is the divide and where the twain can meet. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Mr. Sharma, you state your problem first. Hospital companies have reported their numbers. It's not looking too good. It doesn't look like they're making money hand over fist. But what is GIC or the General Insurance Council's problem?
The issue is the insurance industry is highly regulated. We have a very active regulator called the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority, who maintain an eye on the insurance industry all the time. And we just cannot price the products or make the products the way we want. It needs to be properly, thoroughly vetted by the regulator. Whereas we have a lot of hospitals in the country. I'm not saying all hospitals are like that. Most of the hospitals are luckily good, but unfortunately there are some black sheep here and there as it reflects in our society, as it's like that in our society. The whole problem is with these kind of hospitals. They charge anything they want, but the moment they see an insurance policy, the treatment protocols or the rates that they charge, they all depend on the sum assured. I'm sure many of your viewers' experience also must be the same. Seeing the policy, the insurance policy, accordingly they tune the treatment, which is a very, very unfortunate and sorry situation. But in such a scenario, we wanted this COVID being a pandemic, and in a pandemic scenario where there's no end to the claims coming in, pouring in, and then it's also likely that this COVID situation likely to prevail for nearly 2 years or 2.5 years, as the initial estimates have been pointing out. So what the insurance industry aims at currently is that the insurance industry must be in a position to sustain their services all through the COVID prevalence in the country. So that requires, and considering that the insurance companies' resources are also finite, they are not infinite, that we should be able to sustain, and that calls for a regulated charges being applied to the insured patients also. We are hearing here and there that the hospital industry is demanding that the government regulated rate should not be allowed for insurance policyholders. My question to them is, are the insurance policyholders the citizens of this country? Where from the citizens get their money from? They're all the hard-earned money. After all, they are the same people, the same, mostly the middle class. It is these people with hard-earned money, they have obtained an insurance protection for them.
Mr. Sharma, let the hospital gentleman have his say. You have stated your point in terms of differential rates for those insured and those not insured. Viren, what would your counter be to that, if any?
Yeah, see, it is reasonable to expect that proper rates need to be applied for any kind of treatment, whether it is COVID or not. Now, the situations that the gentleman describes do not explain the norm. They explain the exceptions, right? An exception do not justify the norm. Now, the regulated rates themselves are highly illogical, right? These were forced upon us with almost no consultation. The hospital groups had prepared a set of pricing and submitted it to the agencies that decide on the prices, but they were decided unilaterally. We lose money on every single COVID case that comes in because it doesn't account for most of the other expenses that are involved in the care. But fine, leave it. We have no ability to petition against the government or to say that, we want to charge a lot of money. And frankly, as a group, we don't want to make money treating COVID patients. Leave that. But why on earth should the same exemptions be applied to for-profit companies that insure people coming from Infosys, from Oracle, from Maruti Suzuki? These are corporate patients. Should they get the same benefit that poor patients, that farmers, that people who are paying out of pocket get? And for what? At the end of the day, we're talking about one profit-making company having an agreement, a contractually bound agreement with another profit-making company. We have fixed rates for all of these things, and we've been completely open to discussing with insurance companies on arriving at a reasonable set of rates that can apply for COVID treatment. But the notion that they would like to free ride off Ayushman rates to me is absurd.
No, Viren, then the metric has to be different, right? Because as the representative from GIC is saying that if the metric is simply that rates will depend on whether you have insurance or you don't have insurance, that could become a little unfair, right? Then perhaps you have to look at people with group insurance policies separately, and it needs to be far more transparent than it is today. Isn't that so?
So that gets into the core of pricing philosophy in this country. Let me ask you this. What should you really charge a patient for the illness that he has? Do you charge him based on what it costs to treat him? Or do you charge him on what is fair for him to be able to bear? Cross-subsidization is the essential foundation of every healthcare organization in this country. The poor farmer comes in with the same heart disease that the rich businessman comes in with. The poor farmer gets a good rate, which is much less than what the rich person gets, and the rich person pays for the poor person treatment. Now, if we charge them both the same, why would I discount the rich person, give him a good deal, and overburden the poorer patient?
Okay. Well, Mr. Sharma, there is a point that Viren Shetty is making. And, it's, as you can see from the numbers itself, it's not as if the hospitals are making a lot of money. In fact, there is an existential crisis in the hospital sector as well.
Not about the existential crisis. Everyone is aware at their experience. I'm sure. I just leave it to the viewers to compare it with the experience they have with the hospitals that are currently there in the country and how they are treating the COVID patients in the country. Well, that anyway, we leave it to them. But my point is, why can't we demand a medical services regulatory authority? Aren't the services of the hospitals and other medical services also need to be regulated? Is there no reason why they should not be regulated in this country?
Okay, Mr. Sharma, so let me ask you this. Is there a middle ground perhaps possible? Because as Viren also mentioned that it needs to be far more transparent, because even I know, I mean, yes, it is a fact that a prominent hospital in Mumbai has been charging different rates. Doctors, I mean, cases of doctors charging rates specifically, but that's a separate matter. So what is it that you propose? Can a dialogue be initiated with hospitals across the country?
Of course, ma'am, the General Insurance Council is already in dialogue with a lot of hospital groups. Unfortunately, there is no single group representing all the hospitals in the country. We have the FICCI representing some, then we have CII, we have the Hospitals Association. Likewise, there are 4 or 5 groups which claim themselves to be the representatives of all the hospitals in the country. And we are in negotiations with all of them. Okay. Now, unfortunately, currently the balance is weighed against the insurance industry, considering the demand and the availability of the beds is concerned. Right now, they have an upper hand, and that's why they are not coming down. And what we want is, we don't want any cross-subsidy to be thrust as a responsibility on the insurance industry. Yep. After all, insurance industries, where do they get their money from? From the policyholders. But if it is thrust on them,
Mr. Sharma, a cross-subsidy.
Let me complete, please. Sure. If the claims get very high over the sky, over the roof, then what happens? In the next year, the premium rates will go up. It's again the same, the middle class people that will be burdened with the premium rates. It will be anti-insurance industry. Then what will happen? The penetration, which is already low in the country, will further go down.
Well, Mr. Sharma, the same arguments apply even to the hospital sector, because, even they cannot take cross-subsidy beyond a point. The viability of both insurance and hospital sector is needed for the country. And if you ask patients, nobody will willingly pay any price. It is not something you do out of willingness. It is something that is thrust on you as an expense. But anyway, COVID is an unexpected and unknown problem. So it's hitting insurance and the hospital sector with the same amount of uncertainty and inability to know how much the cost should be. If you have to increase premiums, for COVID patients? How much should that increase be, Mr. Sharma?
In fact, we don't intend increasing the premiums for the COVID treatment. On the contrary, we have introduced exactly COVID cover called COVID Kavach at a much cheaper rate, covering only the COVID, and that too in a pandemic situation. That is the insurance industry. So that goes out to help the people by introducing a specific COVID cover when the pandemic is at its peak and at a much cheaper rate. So that is how we want to service the nation and the people. This is allowed to be done like that. This is allowed to be done, the service like that.
Viren, it is legit that you cannot charge, that hospitals cannot charge too much for patients who can afford, because how do you judge the affordability as well? While it is very clear corporate clients are able to pay, there is a large middle ground which will feel fleeced and which in several cases has been fleeced. What is the way out? The two industries have to come to a dialogue.
Absolutely. And honestly, we are in dialogue right now. It's just that these things tend to take time. And in the meantime, the COVID keeps pillaging on. And as for the points brought up earlier on the fact that there are too many healthcare organizations, we're willing to work. And we don't mind having a healthcare services regulator. It's something every hospital will be willing to bring forward. Because as much as hospitals like ours focus on high-end affordable care, there are many hospitals that may not comply with the same standards, and we want to establish what the true standards for treatment protocols are. Okay. So there's nothing that's being said that we cannot arrive at a middle ground on, but it is upsetting when we take the legal route towards going on these things and trying to equate a common costing standard for the whole country, because that in the end will be very harmful to poor patients, the ones who are not insured, the ones who are covered by the government, because they simply will not be able to bear the true cost of treatment.
Okay. Maybe a graded pricing standard, but a uniform one with various grades for different kind of perhaps users and patients as well. But then we only hope that this will resolve in a better way.
Mr. Sharma, in case the court doesn't agree to the caps that you're suggesting, what is your plan B?
We're not suggesting any particular price to the court. What we would like to do is to involve ourselves by way of impleading into the current PIL that's in the Supreme Court, and request the courts to also keep the travels of in the insurance industry.
Okay.
And that how it's going to adversely affect the penetration of insurance in the country, and how it's going to adversely affect the large number of middle-class people who with hard-earned money have bought the insurance.
Yeah.
And their burden is going to go up in future if the hospital rates are not properly regulated and controlled. Okay. So this, we just want to bring it to the notice of the Supreme Court, and I'm sure the legal authorities that we have in the country, the judiciary, is quite capable of taking appropriate decisions.
Yeah, I guess in extreme cases of need and extreme cases of overcharging are clear, but there will be a large middle ground which will be fuzzy, and the big problem of over-bureaucratization in a sector where help has to be immediate and you can't wait for forms to be filled. Viren Shetty and M.N. Sharma, thank you very much for participating in this initial round of conversations. We will have many more on CNBC TV 18. Thank you very much for joining us. We're wrapping up on Bazaar. Chartbusters next.